presenting the why of the pen name William Shakespeare. This is a sequel to my video, How the Author Probably Got His Name. And there was YouTube video, Thomas Bancroft Knew. Waugh shows how powerful the children and grandchildren of Edward de Vere, Lady Penelope Rich, and Henry Wriotheseley were. This is a partial list of the titles they held: Lord High Admiral of England, Speaker of the House of Lords, Earl Marshal of England, Master of Ordnance to King Charles, Lord Great Chamberlain of England, that was his son, and so on. This video will show the importance of the de Vere side of the following question. Why was concealment needed? Why did he have to wear a mask? I begin by explaining the principle of dérogations. The principle of dérogations stipulates that certain jobs and avocations are not becoming of the aristocracy. They are beneath their stations. One website said, a distinction is made in the effects of dérogations with the child who was born before it was started by the father and the one who comes after. The first retains the original nobility in all its purity, and the second shares the degradation of its author. That means anybody born after the shame will not inherit the title, the lands, or the income. Here is reason one why he had to wear the mask. It's the stigma of his poverty. Information on his finances is from the following sources: Nina Green's paper, The Fall of the House of Oxford, from Brief Chronicles, Volume 1 in 2009. Bonner Miller Cutting's Evermore in Subjection, Edward de Vere and Wardship in Early Modern England, from the Oxfordian, Volume 18. B.M. Ward's seminal biography, The 17th Earl of Oxford, from Contemporary Documents, reprinted in 2023 by Veritas Publishing. The Bank of England's inflation calculator gave this figure for what £10 in 1593 would be worth in 2023 pounds: £2,956.18. This was accessed on June 11, 2023. Queen Elizabeth I, Robert Dudley, and William Cecil mismanaged his estates while he was a ward of the courts from 1562 to 1571. That's 9 years of mismanaging estates and siphoning off of what he should have been given. Cecil did not use de Vere's estate income for his expenses. Therefore, Oxford owed more than £13,000 to the Court of Wards when all was said and done. The Queen charged him £1,306 for his livery, more than any other courtier before or after him. His estimated gross annual income was just £1,768 until the Queen gave him an annuity of £1,000 under a Privy Seal warrant in 1586. The cost of his courtier lifestyle and upkeep of estates was more than £3,800 above his income. He had to pay 2 uncles and an aunt out of his inheritance in accordance with his father's will. When he married Anne Cecil, he did not receive the expected £3,000 dowry. In 1578, he lost £3,400 in the ill-fated Third Frobisher voyage. His losses were only second to Queen Elizabeth, who lost £4,000. By 1587, he had to sell off most of his estates for cash to meet his Court of Ward, Frobisher, and other debts. He had to pay almost £15,000 in forfeited bonds. His annual repayment of a £2,000 debt was £300. His annuity payment on his lands was £322. He had unknown losses on the original Blackfriars Theatre lease. In 1583, Lord Burleigh reported that de Vere had only 4 servants, according to Ward. When he married Elizabeth Trentham, his second wife, her brother had to take care of his finances for him. Reason 2, his lavish patronage of the arts. He patronized many writers. There are 33 dedications to him as patron of books. I believe that he did so just because he was so in debt, he said, screw it. If I'm going to be in debt, might as well use some of my money to do good. He patronized at least 3 acting companies, Oxford's Men, Oxford Boys, and the Children of St. Paul. He patronized a musical troupe. He patronized at least 2 composers, William Byrd and John Farmer. He probably patronized painters as well, though that is currently unknown. Reason 3, he likely wrote, published, and produced plays to supplement his income. And as we have said before, earning a living by one's wit or hands was considered to be beneath the aristocracy under the principle of dérogations. Public playhouses were frequented by petty criminals and adulterers. Plays were consequently considered to be trashy literature. Therefore, he was producing trash, no matter how good they were. The stigma was still attached. Publishing poetry was considered to be déclassé. Reason 4, he married William Cecil's daughter, Anne. Cecil was the most powerful man in England. He would not have wanted his family tainted with de Vere's means of supplementing his income. William Cecil was probably the original domino reason why de Vere had to use the pseudonym, as he, Cecil, frowned upon plays and entertainment in general, because he was a Puritan. Reason 5a. His sister and half-sister married important men. Mary Vere married Peregrine Bertie, 13th Baron Willoughby de Eresby, later envoy to Denmark, the location of Hamlet, his most famous play. Catherine Vere married Edward Windsor, 3rd Baron Windsor, and yes, they are the ancestors of the current royal family of England. Reason 5b. His nieces and nephews were also notables, and these are his known nieces and nephews and their spouses, as I found them. Mary Vere and Peregrine were the parents of Robert Bertie, 1st Earl of Lindsey. Catherine and Edward Windsor were the parents of Frederick Windsor of Stanwell, 4th Lord Windsor. Henry Windsor, who became the 5th Lord Windsor. Edward Windsor Jr., who married Elizabeth Ardington, another lesser noble family. Catherine Windsor married Robert Audley of Berechurch. Margaret Windsor married Sir John Talbot. Reason 6. 2 daughters married into the most powerful families in England. Elizabeth Vere married William Stanley. Bridget Vere married Francis Norris. Susan Vere married Philip Herbert. They, their children, their in-laws, and extended families would not have wanted the stigma of this black sheep of the aristocracy attached to themselves under the principle of attainder. His eldest daughter and sons-in-law held and would hold important positions in the government. William Stanley was the 6th Earl of Derby. He was a legitimate heir to the Tudor throne. He was also a member of the Privy Council and administered Lancashire and Cheshire. Francis Norris would later become the 1st Earl of Berkshire. Philip Herbert, under King James I, was Lord Chamberlain, member of the Privy Council, was a Knight of the Garter, High Steward of Oxford, Keeper of Westminster Palace, and Lord Lieutenant of Kent. His wife Susan Vere was also an extensive patron of writing and the arts. Who would want to risk their lives exposing de Vere as Shakespeare, knowing these people held such power? To make matters simpler, I've just shown de Vere's more important grandchildren. Elizabeth and William would have Anna Sophie Dormer, Countess of Carnarvon, James Stanley, who became the 7th Earl of Derby, Anne Stanley, who married the Count of Ancram. Bridget Vere Norris would be the mother of Elizabeth Norris. Susan Vere and her husband would sire Philip Herbert, the 5th Earl of Pembroke, and Sir Charles Herbert. Here we see his grandchildren, their spouses, and titles. James Stanley, the 7th Earl of Derby, seen on the right, married Charlotte de la Tremoille, who was the granddaughter of William of Orange. That William of Orange, a member of the nobility. Philip Herbert, down at the bottom, married Penelope Naughton, who became the Countess of Pembroke naturally. On her death, he married Catherine Villiers, who became the Countess of Pembroke, of course, and she was one of the daughters of Georges Villiers, the favourite of King James I. Sir Charles Herbert would marry Mary Villiers, who became later the Countess of Shirland. Who would want to risk their lives exposing de Vere as Shakespeare, knowing these people held such power? De Vere's daughters are therefore important in the authorship issue. Reason 7. His Aunt Frances, Uncle Henry Howard, and their children. Reason 7a. Henry Howard, 1st Earl of Northampton. Under James I, in 1603, he was made a Privy Councillor. In 1604, he's made Warden of the Cinque Ports, the 5 ports that were the main entrance to England. 1604, he was also made the Earl of Northampton, and he helped broker the peace with Spain in that same year. In the inset painting, you can see he is circled. In 1605, he was made a Knight of the Garter and Keeper of the Lord Privy Seal. In 1609, he was High Steward of Oxford University. 1612, Chancellor of Cambridge University. Also in that same year, he was made a Commissioner of the Treasury, one of the most important jobs, of course, in any royal administration. He was also judge at the trials of Sir Walter Raleigh, Lord Cobham, Guy Fawkes, and Henry Garnet. Reason 7b was Henry Scrope, 9th Baron Scrope of Bolton. In 1559, he was the Marshal of the English army at the Siege of Leith. 1562 was made Warden of the West Marches and Captain of Carlisle. In 1569, as Captain of Carlisle, he helped suppress the Northern Uprising. In 1569, he held Mary Queen of Scots at Bolton Castle on behalf of Queen Elizabeth I. In 1584, he was elected as a Knight of the Garter, and in 1589, consulted with King James VI regarding governance of Scotland. He would later become King James I. Reason 7c, Henry Berkeley, 17th Baron Berkeley. In 1553, he was made Knight of the Bath at the coronation of Mary I. In 1554, his estates were restored to him. In 1555, he had attained his livery. In 1603 to 1613, he was Vice Admiral of Gloucester and also Lord Lieutenant of Gloucester. Reason 7d, Thomas Howard, the 4th Duke of Norfolk. His first wife was Mary, daughter of the 19th Earl of Arundel, Mary FitzAlan. Second wife is Mary Audley, who was the daughter of the 1st Baron Audley of Walden and the widow of Sir Henry Dudley. In 1560, he was the Earl Marshal of England. The same year, he was commander of the English army in Scotland, and he also negotiated the Treaty of Berwick. In 1568, he was the Principal of Commission of York with regard to the trial of Mary Queen of Scots. The next year, he was imprisoned for participation in the Northern Rebellion, and in 1570 was executed for his part in the Ridolfi plot against the Queen. Reason 7e, Charles Neville, 6th Earl of Westmoreland. In 1569, he joined the Northern Rebellion. 2 years later, in 1571, he was attainted by an Act of Parliament. The next year, he fled to Flanders, and his lands were confiscated. In 1585, reported to have been involved in a plot to invade England. In 1588, led a small English force in anticipation of the Spanish Armada's victory over England, and in 1601 died in exile, forgotten and broke. Reason 8. Uncle Geoffrey Vere, Aunt Elizabeth, and their children. I will only go through 2 of the people. Reason 8a. Sir Horace Vere, the first Baron of Tilbury, also known as Horatio in Hamlet. In 1590, he joined his elder brothers Robert and Sir Francis to fight the Spanish in the Netherlands. In 1592, on July 5th, he was wounded at Steenwijk. In 1596, he was at the siege of Cadiz, and in June of that year, he was knighted for his bravery. In 1600, he commanded 300 men at the Battle of Newport. In 1602, on January 7th, he commanded 12 companies at the siege of Ostend. In 1602, in the spring, he took command of the English forces after Francis was wounded in the head. And in 1609, he followed his brother as governor of Den Briel in the Netherlands. And then in 1612, was appointed as governor of Utrecht. Reason 8b, Sir Francis Vere, also known as Francesco from Hamlet. In 1585, he started his military career under Robert Dudley, the first Earl of Leicester and Queen Elizabeth's favourite. He was the man who helped bankrupt de Vere. In 1586, he was at the siege of Sluis. In 1588, he distinguished himself at Bergen op Zoom, where he was knighted. In 1589, he was promoted to Sergeant Major General over the English troops. In 1591, he gained victory with Maurice of Nassau, Prince Maurice of Nassau, at the siege of Knodensburg, and Ben Jonson served under him as a volunteer. In 1598, he negotiated the Anglo-Dutch Alliance Treaty. In 1600, he was at the Battle of Newport. And from 1601 to 1602, he was at the defense of Ostend, where he became wounded. In 1607, on October 26th, he married Elizabeth Dent, the stepdaughter of Sir Julius Caesar. And if the armor Francis is wearing looks familiar to you, you may be correct in thinking that de Vere wore it for this portrait. With such illustrious relatives, is it any wonder de Vere's association with drama and poetry was scandalous and shameful? With such treacherous relatives, is it any wonder de Vere's association with drama and poetry would have added more shame and scandal to the family? These are just some of the reasons for his disguise. There are more reasons, but those were the top ones. This is compelling evidence why he had to hide behind the name William Shakespeare. Writers of the period had to keep the disguise intact. This was the situation they faced for decades. All of the relatives that we have seen and more in the purple box up top had spies everywhere, monitored the press, and ensured that nothing would be leaked. The writers on the bottom had to keep their silence, despite the fact that so many of them wanted to say this was the man who wrote the plays and poems bearing the Shakespeare name. In time, the people who knew the secret died out. By the year 1740, when the statue in Westminster was erected, there were even fewer people who knew the secret. When they died out, the secret died out with them. Our Shakespeare, the real author, disappeared behind the servant Shakespeare, the pen name. Now you know why he had to wear a mask. Thanks for watching. Stay safe.